Hey friends, welcome back to another video. My name's Emma Lefebvre, and today I'm going to give you 2 tips that are going to elevate the way you paint your watercolor trees. So let's jump in and get started. Okay friends, today is a quick video on an important lesson when it comes to painting trees. So one of the benefits I find that I have now teaching in person a lot more is I get to see tendencies that beginners do that can really make their work look a little less professional. Obviously, as we are all beginners, we are learning, but one little tip I have can really elevate your trees from looking like this to this. Okay, so the first thing that I tend to see is when people are painting trees, let's do a yellow one. We're gonna do some autumn trees here. You know, they do a lot more solid objects. So let's say this is the top of the tree, and you can see here it's very solid and it looks just kind of like a blob. Maybe they don't do an exact circle, but it's a very solid color, okay? And there's not really much else to it. There's no shading or anything, and it's just one solid color. The other thing I see, which I definitely feel can really transform your work, is how thick your tree trunk is. So I'm just gonna grab some burnt sienna, mix it with a little bit of indigo here to make a dark brown. And I see this with a lot of beginners. You have a big tree trunk, and then you have these very straight branches like this. Now, is this bad? No, I will not say that any art is bad. It's definitely stylized, maybe a little bit more illustrative, but it's simple and it's not as accurate or as realistic as it could be. So I see these big, thick trunks and very, very straight branches. Okay, a couple little tweaks that you can do to really elevate your trees are very simple. So the first one is, let's do our tree. Here we did kind of like a circular tree. We can keep with that circular shape, but what I want you to do is leave some white space. So we're doing like a yellow tree here, okay? You can even draw like a circle to give yourself kind of like a template, or a guide, but I want you to leave some white space. Okay, this could be the sky behind, and I want you to add a little bit of texture so it's not one solid line. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay, leave a little bit of white space in there because we're going to use that after. Okay, so it's still the same kind of circular shape, but there's a little bit more texture to it because of the white space I've left, and you can see there's like little kind of bits coming off of that shape, so it looks like they're leaves. Now that's one thing. The second thing is to add shadows. So this is a solid yellow color, but to make it look a little bit more realistic, we want to provide the viewer with some shadows. So we want to create some sort of light source, and you get to decide where that light source is coming from, so it can guide you to where you place your shadows. A light source in this case would be the sun. So let's say the sun is shining from this way. You're going to imagine kind of like this line hitting the top of the tree here, and that's going to give you an idea of where to place your shadows. So if the sun is hitting this part of the tree, this is going to be the lightest area, and then underneath the tree here is going to be our darkest area. So I'm just going to grab some yellow ochre, which is a darker yellow, and I'm going to start tapping it on the underneath over here. Now, trees are 3D objects, so it's not like it's one solid shape. So if I were to place, you know, a shadow over here, it's not just going to be at the bottom. You have areas and branches that stick out. So while the sun is hitting up here, you might have a branch that's kind of sticking out and the leaves are hitting over here. So if there's more sunlight over here, you're going to need to add some shadow underneath that. So maybe I'll just kind of pick another area where there would be a little bit more shadow. Okay, so it's still hitting this side, but we're creating this area, which is in a highlighted area. Shadow has to be underneath it, and underneath it. This area would be sticking out too, hitting the sun, and this would be the shadow underneath. And just these little tweaks are going to make it look a little bit more realistic. You can even go as far as adding just a little bit more shadow, another layer of just like a darker brown. It's up to you. You don't have to do 3 layers, but if you want to, you can. just a little bit, and it just deepens it even more. Okay, so that's my first tip, is adding the shadow. My second tip, which is I find one of the most crucial things when painting trees, is making sure you have a thin trunk. We did a really thick line here, but look how different this is going to look when I add a thin trunk. So I'm actually not going to hit the top of the tree here. I'm going to go just slightly underneath, leaving a little bit of white space. And I'm going to do a thin trunk like this. Okay, and then my branches are not going to be really solid straight lines. They're going to be kind of crooked, a little bit wavy and jagged. You can kind of bring this one up a bit. Maybe this trunk splits up into two. Still very, very light or thin. I'm using thin pressure. I'm using light pressure is what I mean. Okay. So I get these tiny little lines, and already it looks more realistic than that. Okay, so obviously trees aren't just always one solid shape either. If you want to maybe branch off, maybe a little branch over here, it's kind of coming off, you could do that, and then we can add some leaves there in a second. But this white space also gives us insight to some of the branches that are going throughout. So you can add little branches in these little white areas, so it looks like it's continuing outward. Okay? Then for this branch here that we added, I'm just going to add a couple more leaves like that. And already it just looks way more realistic. Okay? And this isn't even a realistic looking tree. Obviously, you can't see individual leaves or anything like that, but it's definitely an elevated step up from this basic tree. Okay? So a thin trunk really makes a difference. Let's just for fun do another tree shape. So we have this kind of circular shape that we are looking at, but let's say we want to do more of like a triangular shape. And I'm not saying, what are they called? Like an evergreen tree, but there's still more kind of like triangular shape. So like I said, you could always use a guide if you wanted to. Okay, kind of like this triangular shape. See this cone shape? Now I'm not going to leave it solid like this. Okay, that's not what we're doing. Again, if you want to do a more like stylized illustration look, you can do this. These rules aren't applicable to everything, okay? If you want to do something like that, you can. That is totally okay. But to elevate them just to look a little bit more realistic, this is what I do. Okay, so going with this shape, I would start with my lightest color. Let's even grab a little bit of yellow in our green. Remember, have an idea of where your light source is. I always start off with my lightest color. And I'm just going to use the tip of my brush to kind of dab these inconsistent shapes. Okay, and I'm just using some olive green for this. Leaving our little bits of white space. But this is helping to build the shape that we want. And I'm not doing tiny little dabs where they're like individual like leaf shapes. It's just to give it a little bit of texture. Okay, then I'm going to kind of go outside of this triangular shape and just create some extra leaves. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow because up here it'd be a little bit lighter. So again, our light source is coming from this way. It's going to hit the same area. Grab a little bit more yellow. It's a little bit brighter on the side. I'm going to have some leaves kind of coming out this way. Like that. Just these little dabs. Remember your white space. You don't want it so solid. And then on this side a bit more, just these tiny little dabs. Like that. Now we want to go in with our shadows. Okay, so the shadows are going to be underneath each section. I'm going to grab a darker green here. Okay, I'm going to hit it on the bottom right here because this is where the sun would have access to these leaves the least. So it would be a lot darker. And then again in sections, maybe it's hitting the branches that are sticking out here, but there has to be shadow under this section. Maybe a little bit on this side too, under this section. Okay, and I'm doing a lot of wet on wet, so it's all blending together. Like that. Okay, and then our tree trunk, again, remember, we don't want this big, thick tree trunk. Okay, we want something nice and thin. So we're going to start just a little bit further down. Again, it can have a little bit of a wobble to it, a little bit of a curve even. Some jaggedness. I like to have one branch that kind of starts a little bit lower. And if you're having a hard time, which is what I see also, why people make such thick strokes for their branches, they have their brush on an angle, which allows more of the bristles to touch the page, giving a thicker stroke. If you hold your brush vertical, where only the tip is touching the page, you're gonna get finer lines. Okay, so hold it nice and vertical, and even use the shakiness of your hand to guide you to do these more realistic, shaky kind of tree trunks or in branches. Okay? You don't want it to be this straight line. You kind of want it to have like a little bit of a shakiness to it. Okay, so embrace that. If you do have a trouble with like your hand control, embrace that part, okay? Like so. And that's how you can turn your ordinary trees into more elevated, realistic looking trees. So I hope that was a helpful tip to show you the different ways to shade and to draw your tree trunks and branches. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and I will see you in our next video. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. Have a great day, guys. Bye.